All right, welcome everyone to Azure Community Live. My name is Esteban Garcia, connecting from Orlando, Florida. Really excited about having our second session. Today we're hosting Donovan Brown. As some of you might have been here earlier for our earlier session, we're hosting a series of sessions of dealing with Azure across the world. With me, I have two hosts from Europe and Australia. So I'm gonna let Gert introduce himself.
Hi, my name is Geert from the Netherlands. I'll be the host for Azure Community Live, basically in the European time zone, so hosting in the European evenings. We did a session earlier today already with Laurent Bouillon. You can still watch it back on YouTube, so if you miss it, if you just living in the US time zones, it was probably a bit early for you. So, really curious to see how our second session or the first one for the American time zones will go. So over to Lars.
Hello. I am on a satellite connection. Yay, Australia internet. So apologies for the slight delay in the ping time here. I'm a host of any of these meetups that's going to happen in the Australia Pacific time zones. We are currently all on holiday because it's summer here, so there aren't any planned right now, but there will be very soon. So watch out for the space if you are from the AUNZ/Pacific area.
Awesome. And with that, we're really excited to welcome Donovan Brown, who's going to be talking to us about app modernization using the power of Azure. So without Donovan, take it away.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited. I think everyone has their, they can't speak to us, right? Because I don't want all the oohs and ahs and applause to disrupt me or distract me, because this is going to be freaking awesome. So what we're going to do really quick is It's actually going to take me about an hour to do everything I want to show. I have absolutely no slides. And what we're going to do is imagine that we're talking to our boss on Teams, and our boss says, "Hey, Donovan, it's time for our company to embark on this digital transformation. It's very important for our company, and we would like you to lead the effort." It's happened to all of us, right? You have this brownfield application that you have to then move to the cloud. And I know what you're wondering. Well, I didn't know Donovan works for Able. I don't work for Able, but he was the only person I could get to actually participate to give me my Teams all set up. So don't start any rumors that Able is now my boss. He is not my boss. But nevertheless, this happens, right? And what I like about this is that we actually use Teams, obviously, at Microsoft. And it's more than just a place for us to communicate. It's actually a place for us to plan. Because what we can actually do is pull in things like Kanban boards from Azure DevOps directly in the channel. We can bring in OneNote notebooks. We can bring in files from SharePoint. I've collaborated on Word documents. I've collaborated on PowerPoints directly inside of Teams. It's where we do our meetings. It's where we have our chats, where we have our group chats. It's just an amazing platform. And being able to pull in an Azure DevOps Kanban board into my Teams channel means I can just drag and drop this digital transformation tile. And anyone who is seeing this Kanban board in Teams, on the web, on their phone, just saw that tile move from one column to the next. So it's this real live interactive way of collaborating with your team. But also, I was able to break down this digital transformation task and say, I'm going to have to go back in and migrate my database. I'm also going to have to migrate my front end as well. And it's kind of cool to be able to visualize that. So what I want to do really quickly is give you a quick tour of the application that we're going to be moving from on-prem to the cloud. So that is called Tailwind Traders. And as you can see up here, it is running on local host. So I have everything hosted locally. This is exactly what you'd be doing if you're running inside of your own data center. I have a MongoDB running inside of a container. I have SQL Server running, and I also have a React application. It's just a normal e-commerce site. So I can come over here and click on Syncs, for example, and I can add this to my cart. You'll notice on the right-hand side, my cart has gone up. I can go over to gardening. We can go and buy some gnomes here. So we'll go ahead and add this to my cart as well. And as you can see, this is now being added as well. The actual catalog of the items that I show you, that's stored in SQL Server. But the contents here of my actual shopping cart, that's stored in MongoDB. And to move my application from on-prem to the cloud, I got to move all of it. And what I'm going to do is show you exactly how we move all that stuff in this session together right now. All the code that I'm going to be using for this is actually living inside of GitHub. You might not know, but I think everyone should know by now, Microsoft now owns GitHub. We acquired them. And what was really cool about that was that I felt like I got 40 million teammates, right? Because there's 40 million contributors on GitHub. And it's almost as if they now are teammates of mine that I can use to make amazing, amazing things inside of all the platforms and all the tools that I actually use. Even though we're currently on-prem, I tell a lot of our customers this, you don't have to wait to move to using DevOps best practices just because you're deploying on the cloud. So what you can do instead is you can start using Azure DevOps right now today. And what you can see is this is an Azure pipeline that I'm using, Azure DevOps pipeline, but it's deploying to IIS behind my firewall. It's also deploying my database and my backend for me actually onto my on-prem assets behind my firewall. Don't assume that Azure DevOps means I can only deploy to the cloud and specifically to Azure. You can actually use Azure DevOps to deploy anywhere, on-prem, in the cloud, our cloud, or someone else's, on your mobile devices, on your IoT devices. You can use this platform for any deployment scenario. One of the things that we really liked about it is how secure Azure DevOps is as a DevOps platform. For example, if I come over here, I can click on security and I can lock down this entire pipeline. I can determine who can see it, who can launch it, who can delete it, who can approve different stages. I have complete control, so that when you're thinking about security, security starts with the actual device that you're holding, extends into your pipeline, and continues into the infrastructure in which you're going to run your application. And I wanted to show you that we have control over the entire pipeline. But in addition to the entire pipeline, we also have control on each individual stage. So maybe I want to have someone who can see the QA stage, but not the staging or the production stages. I want my developers to have access to my development stage inside my pipeline. And I can drill down to the individual area of my pipeline that I need to apply security to and apply that appropriate security at any level that I need. Another thing that's really good about this, besides the security, is the task library that we have. The task library is enormous. It just gets bigger and bigger every single time I come and look at it. It is pretty much anything that you can imagine that you need to do to deploy code anywhere is a task already in our library. We develop these tasks in the open in a GitHub repository where you can go and see exactly how we've written ours and then write your own and add them to the marketplace or add them to your projects if you want to. Anything you can imagine you can do, you just drag and drop that over here to the left and it becomes part of your actual build. If you don't see what you need here, what I would highly encourage you to do is simply go over and take a quick peek at our marketplace. Our marketplace is where our partners and our collaborators and our peers go off and add additional value to Visual Studio Team Services, it used to be called, but now it's called Azure DevOps. Before that was VSO, if you're keeping up with all the different names. But if I search on this, you can see we have 1,632 different extensions that you can add, from anywhere from Sonar Cube to White Source Bold to you name it. Chances are there's an extension. We even have an extension in here for AWS, which means if you want to use our pipeline to deploy to all the assets in AWS, we got you covered there as well, which is really, really cool. So before you write your own, go over there and check on that. One other thing I really like about our pipelines is our ability to have approvers throughout our pipeline. What I mean by that is maybe I don't want the code to just go rushing into my Selenium test. I want there to be an individual who says, I give you permission to go into that next stage or leave the previous stage. And you can do that by simply adding people's names here. So I can say Donovan Brown. And when I do that, you'll be able to see I have Donovan Brown, or I can actually add groups as well. So I can add all my direct reports. I can add all the people in my organization. And then that group or person becomes an approver. At this particular stage of my deployment, Azure DevOps will stop, send out all the notifications saying you need to come in and give us your approval. Once it collects all the approvals, it'll then continue the pipeline for us automatically, which is really nice. What we noticed is a lot of our customers need approvals from non-human beings. They need approvals from other systems. And one of the systems that we found a lot was ServiceNow, which you can see down here at the bottom. So instead of you having to stop your process here manually, run over the ServiceNow, do all the stuff in ServiceNow that you have to do. Once all that's done, send an email to your peers, have them come back over into Azure DevOps, and then push whatever buttons they need to start the pipeline up again. Instead, we can talk to ServiceNow for you automatically. The pipeline will pause. It'll communicate with ServiceNow. You'll go over into ServiceNow and do all the stuff you have to do over there. And once it's done, ServiceNow will communicate with Azure DevOps and say you can now proceed or actually not proceed that particular release, and that release will continue automatically. So again, the approvals are something that I think we don't say enough about because it's just an extremely powerful process. All this to say, you can start doing DevOps today, even if you're on-prem, but we're going to start moving forward. So how in the world do I get started? How do I learn about all this different stuff that Azure has to offer? What you can do is type in the word docs.com. If you hit docs.com, it takes you here. This is the landing page for all Docs Microsoft. Doesn't matter if you want to become a better developer, if you want to learn more about Azure, if you want to learn more about SQL, you're an IT pro, you're a mobile developer, doesn't matter. If it comes from Microsoft, this is the place that you go to get help. One of my favorite things about our docs is the fact that we also have learning modules. So instead of just reading through lots and lots of documentation, what you can actually do instead is go through what we call learning paths. And what we've done is we've gamified it. So I can come over here to my profile, and you can see that I've earned level 7. And in my team, that's not impressive at all. I have a couple of my team members that are on level 8 and level 9 already. So I have a lot of homework to do. But it's that competitive nature that it starts to it. When I found out where my peers were, it made me want to go learn more about Azure simply so that I could beat them learning Azure. Learning Azure is fun, but beating your friends at learning Azure, that is freaking awesome, right? So my team's very competitive. I love that about us, but this is a way that kind of motivates us to go off and learn more about it. You can follow your friends can follow you, you earn badges and trophies. And what's really cool about these is that any Azure that you need, we give you for free. So if we're teaching you how to spin up a virtual machine, you don't have to go into your own Azure account and spin up a virtual machine. We will actually give you a sandbox with all the time that you need to spin up the virtual machine, see the virtual machine running, do different things to it, and then tear it back down, and it does not cost you a dime. Another thing that's really good about this is that this will also get you certified if you want. So if you're interested in getting certified on Azure, these learning paths have been designed to help you get ready to prepare to pass those exams, which is really nice as well. So if we jump back over to Docs and you realize, hey, Donovan, Azure is what I want to learn about, click on Azure, and now we have all this amazing Get Started content. These Get Started content allows you to start from nothing and be successful creating databases or creating VMs or deploying applications. We have different products that we offer as well. There's hundreds of services inside of Azure, and you can get to all of them. This is amazing. I feel like a kid in a candy store, or just like a mechanic with an amazing toolbox with all the tools I need to build whatever I can freaking imagine. It's all in here for you. And you don't have to be a .NET developer. I am a .NET developer, but as you can see, the language in which you program in is not important to us at Microsoft. We just want your workloads running in Azure, so we're going to help you if you're a Go developer, a Rust developer, Node developer, .NET developer, Java developer, whatever language you program in, we want to make sure that we give you SDKs and tools to help you. But I noticed that people don't just program in different languages, people also speak different languages. So we've gone through a lot of effort to make sure that our learning modules and that our documentation has been localized into so many languages that we hope that if you want to come in here and have a very natural experience, we've already localized our documentation such that you will be able to find the docs that you need and be effective in the language that you speak and also the program that you want, the programming language that you want to use. Now, having a great toolbox is fantastic, but you got to know how to put the pieces together. And we also have architectural documentation that makes sure that you're doing best practices when you're starting to use these different tools and assets and services that we provide for you inside of Azure. Now, Docs, obviously, fantastic place to start. It's really well, and these are also developed in the open. You find a typo, want to contribute an example, you can actually create a pull request and make our docs better than they are right now. It's been an amazing ride with our documentation. I'm very proud of it. But let's say you didn't know about docs.com and you went directly to Azure. That's still a good move because in Azure, we have something called the Quick Start Center. The Quick Start Center is a curated list of information directly available to you from the portal that allows you to go off and learn how to set up your Azure, learn how to migrate, which is what we're going to be doing, from on-prem into the cloud, ways to innovate, make sure you're modernizing your app. You're not just lifting and shifting it from one VM to another, but you're really taking advantage of all the things that the cloud has to offer when you do that type of migration. If you have a really quick and simple project, hey, I want to create a web app. There's a way that you can do that. I want to go ahead and create a virtual machine or deploy my databases. We'll be able to hold your hand and guide you through that process so that you don't get tripped up and that you're going to be on your way to success when you're doing it. And again, if you're ready to do some online courses, we have those available for you directly inside of the portal so that you can go off and get certified and be successful. Just like we localized our documentation, we've been very clear that we wanted to localize Azure itself, the actual portal. And as you can see, lots of languages so that you can have a first-class experience when you're learning how to use Azure and when you've actually gone into the portal and started using Azure yourself. So how do you actually use Azure? Let's talk about creating resources, because that's what it's all about. It's about adding these resources into the cloud that are going to allow you to be effective. All you have to do is click on create resource. And in doing so, you're now brought into our marketplace. And our marketplace is grouped into different areas like Internet of Things, databases, compute, AI and machine learning, whatever it is that you can imagine, you can go back in and create some of these items. And if you want to learn more about it, you simply click on see more and we'll show you all of the different offerings that we have, not just the most popular ones. If I return back, maybe I don't know what group the item is that I want to create. You can just come over here and just start typing in the name. So I want to create a key vault. A key vault, if you don't know what it is going to be explained to you right here to make sure that you've selected the actual item that you intended to create to make sure it solves the problem that you want. And this is exactly what I want. I'm going to take secrets like connection strings and passwords and securely store them inside a key vault and then use them throughout my resources so that I'm not copying around in plain text this sensitive information that I don't want to get jeopardized or sniffed by someone. All I have to do is come in here and say, hey, what subscription do I want to put it in? What resource group do I want to use? A resource group is a logical grouping of all of the different resources that define an environment or a target project that I might be working on. I usually create a dev, QA, staging, prod resource group, and then I put all the resources in that particular resource group, and then I can delete and tear down those entire resources for an environment without having to worry about accidentally deleting production when I meant to delete dev or QA and things like that. So here I'm going to go ahead and select a resource group. I need to give my key vault a name, and then I pick where in the world because we have 54 regions. And I can pick anywhere in the world I want to store this. And then I simply go ahead and pick my pricing tier. Pricing is something that we're going to talk a lot about on how I can control my pricing. Because when you go to the cloud, a lot of people are nervous that they're going to have a blank check that's just going to get too big. But you don't have to worry about that, and I'll show you why. Once it validates everything's good, I simply click on create. And then Azure in the background is going to go off and start provisioning this particular item for me. As you can see, it says your deployment is underway. And I can go off and relax, go do other things while this is being built for me. I wanted to show you a resource group. I just kind of told you what a resource group was, but I think when I show you a resource group, it'll make a little bit more sense. So clicking on this shows me a list of all of my resource groups. I'm going to go ahead and select the first one. And when I do so, it now shows me all the resources that I've already provisioned as part of this migration to the cloud. I knew I was going to need a SQL Server database. I knew I was going to need a Cosmos DB because the first step is to move my backend. And as you can see, I've already provisioned those things here. Meanwhile, it's creating my key vault for me as well. You can also create resources from the resource group, which is kind of cool. So I click on add here, and let's say I wanted to create a Cosmos DB. The reason it's cool to start from a resource group is you'll notice that the resource group is automatically filled in. It says, hey, you started from a resource group. Chances are that's the resource group that you want this to be put in. And I chose Cosmos DB for a specific reason. I wanted to show that this is a multimodal dialog or database. That means here I can have core SQL. I can have Azure Cosmos DB from MongoDB API, which is what I'm going to use. I'm going to be able to take the data that's stored on MongoDB on-prem and move it to the cloud using Cosmos DB without changing a single line of the actual application. I'm going to change configuration only, restart my app, and all the data is going to be pointing at Cosmos DB instead of pointing at my on-prem, which is really cool. If you're already using Azure Table Storage, you're already using MongoDB, you do not have to change a single line of your application. You just change your configuration and everything just magically works. And I'm going to prove that for you in just a moment when we go off and migrate some of our data. So let's talk about migrating data. I'm going to jump back over into my resource group. And I'm going to go into something called the Azure Database Migration Service. What this is it's a service provided by Azure that allows you to migrate your data from any data source that you need into either SQL Server or Cosmos DB. For the interest of time, I already moved SQL Server. So I have a migration project in here that took the data from my on-prem SQL Server and moved it into Azure SQL. But I want to show you how I did that doing the Cosmos DB here live on stage. So here we go. We're going to create a new migration project. We're going to go ahead and call this migration project MongoDB. It's of type MongoDB. And as you can see, we can come from MySQL, Postgres, Oracle. We can come from some of our competitors' clouds if we need to. So AWS, if you're already hosting over there, you can bring that stuff with you very, very easily. Now it knows that, hey, if you're targeting MongoDB, then you need to make sure that you have a Cosmos DB with MongoDB API, which is great. It also gives me different ways of migrating my data. I can do what we call an offline data migration, which is it looks at my source, takes a snapshot of what my source is, and then moves that into Cosmos DB. If the source continues to change, those changes will not be reflected inside of Cosmos DB. If I do an online data migration instead, that will keep those two in sync, which would allow me to go ahead and set up a data migration plan, move the data that's currently inside of my MongoDB up into Cosmos DB, and should people continue to use my on-prem property, all that data would be synchronized into the cloud as well. Then I could slowly migrate from one to the other versus having to have any downtime whatsoever, right? So this potentially gives me a zero downtime deployment as I slowly move people from on-prem to the cloud, keeping all the data in sync as we move them. And the other one is create a project only, but not do the migration. The default for me works, but I wanted to explain each of those options to you. So let's go ahead and create and run an activity. Step number one, let's get connected to the actual MongoDB that is running on-premise right now. And that is sitting behind RDP. So this is the server name that my MongoDB is running on. That's the port that it's running on. And I'm going to go ahead and click on save. When I click on save, I'm now going to be able to verify that Azure can actually connect to that particular instance of MongoDB currently containing our on-prem shopping cart. So now it says, hey, Donovan, you're going to have to make sure that you target a Cosmos DB that has that API. It already found one for me, and it's already figured out the connection strings. Should I want to change this, I could, but there's no need. I'm going to go ahead and click on save. Now what it's going to do is it's going to interrogate the on-prem MongoDB, finding out all the databases inside of it, all the collections inside that database, and allow me to select how much of the data I want to move. And I definitely want to move my Tailwind traders over. I also want to select which collections I want to move, and I want to move the collection that's already in there. So I'm going to go ahead and click on save. And finally, I need to give this an activity name and then start this activity that will move the data from my Mongo on-prem to my Cosmos in the cloud. So I'm going to go ahead and call this as well MongoDB and click on run migration. When it starts to run the migration, this is where it actually moves the data from on-prem into the cloud. And because I did offline, once it's done, it's done. Had I done an online migration, it would keep that running until I said stop, keeping all the data in sync. This usually doesn't take very long, so if I go ahead and click on refresh, you can see it's already complete. And the two items that I had inside of my shopping cart from the on-prem is now sitting inside of the Cosmos DB sitting in the cloud. Now, what we need to do is make sure that we actually get the connection strings and update our on-prem app to see if we can get it to move successfully. I don't know if you're as old as I am, but back when I was developing, there used to be a website called connectionstrings.com. It might even still be around. The reason we needed it is creating a connection string was such a pain in the butt that we needed help being able to remind ourselves how do we actually create that particular connection string. So what I'm going to do here is show you just how easy it is now to get those connection strings instead. So I'm going to go to my Cosmos DB. And from Cosmos DB, I can just click on connection strings. And right here is the connection string that I need to be able to connect to this particular item. So I'm going to jump over here to my application. So this is my application running on-prem. And as you can see, I'm connected to a local MongoDB. I'm just simply going to replace this with the connection string that I copied from Azure. I'm going to stop my app running, and then I'm simply going to restart it. I did not change a single line of the code. I just changed my configuration, and I'm going to restart my application, and all the changes are going to take effect. I did not have to change my code. So if I come back over to my Tailwind traders here, let's go back to appliances. Let's add oven as well. And now I have 3 items in my shopping cart. I'm going to go back to here, just add some more blinds just to prove that we now have 4 items in our shopping cart. But what we want to do is make sure that these items are actually in the cloud and not just sitting on-prem. So if I go back over here, I'm going to use a feature called Data Explorer of Cosmos DB that allows me to graphically navigate inside and see that I do indeed have 4 items inside the Cosmos DB. And these 2 additional items are the bathtub and the solid white sheer curtains that I added to my shopping cart. So very easily, not a single line of code was changed. The application is none the wiser that I moved from on-prem to the cloud, and all of a sudden the app works just as well as it did before. So that's really nice when it comes to migrating. But why move from Mongo and move into Cosmos? Because Cosmos has a lot of really cool features. One of them is the ability to replicate data globally. So what I can do is simply start clicking on different areas in the world where I might have customers and want to make sure that they have really quick access to my data. And these aren't just read-only. because I've actually enabled the multi-region writes, these are read-write regions. Such that if my primary or the very first region were to go down, my entire application would continue to work. People would still be able to add items to their cart and still be able to use the site as is while I go back in and troubleshoot why one of my nodes went down. If you only had them be readers, then it'd be high performance for reading, but once that primary node went down, there's no more adding items to your cart and it could actually cripple your application. But now we have the ability to be able to give you great levels of redundancy and concurrency whenever you need it. Another thing that we want to talk about besides just globally moving the data is how does the data move across the world? As I start to select those different regions, what does that really mean to me as an application? And what I love is this graphic on the right that kind of visually helps you understand that this is the amount of time it's going to take for the data to move from one area to the other. And what you can do is simply change the type of rule that you're interested in, and you'll see how it changes the notes on the right-hand side, and then you can determine if this is acceptable for the type of application that I'm actually trying to run, and then again, change it again, and you can actually see, will the data get there? And it will, because we have SLAs guaranteeing that the data will get there, but what is the time delay of the data actually propagating across those other items? So this is a really good visualization to make sure that we talk about that. And the way that you're able to do that is by figuring out how much it's going to cost. How many replicas do I need? All depends on how much I'm willing to spend and invest. And what I like about the way that we scale up our items is that we give you an estimate right here on the screen. So let's say we want to up our RUs. RUs are the unit of measure on performance of inside of your Cosmos DB. Now, if I simply change this from 500 to 5,000, you instantly get an update of this is what we're probably going to have to pay. We're going to go to $9.60 a day versus the 96 cents we were paying a moment ago. And you can judge and budget and predict how much your spend is going to be based on what it is that you need to do inside of your Cosmos DB, which is really good as well. The last thing I wanted to talk to you about is our performance. We're very serious about our performance. We have SLAs on everything. For example, availability. Our availability SLA is obviously being met here. We can see what our SLA is. Not what is that? 6 nines, 5 nines, but we're at 100%. And we're the only place I can imagine that needs a chart that goes above 100%. That's how hard we try at Microsoft. That we're going to figure out how to be more than 100% reliable, and that's why this chart goes well above 100%, which is kind of funny. Latency, we guarantee that you're going to have a 10 millisecond latency, but we're at about sub 1 millisecond. Like all the data gets to where it needs to get in 1 millisecond or less, and we have an SLA of 10 milliseconds. So we're well above any metrics that we need there as well. And then obviously for consistency, you want your data to be consistent as you move it across. And as you can see, we're slamming our SLA at 100%, and we're meeting it just like we promised. So if you need a reliable data store, you need it fast, you need it globally replicated, Cosmos DB is a really good option for you for different data stores. Now, not all data has to go inside Cosmos DB or even belongs inside of Cosmos DB. Inside of Azure, we have lots of different ways for you to store data. And being an old school developer, I have a really soft spot in my heart for SQL Server. I've been developing on SQL Server for as long as I can remember, and moving SQL Server to the cloud gives you lots of benefits. Not only does it give you infinite scale, but it also gives you geo-replication. Setting up geo-replication with yourself, like you're on your own SQL Server, means having hardware in different places around the world, setting up all the networking to make sure that they can communicate and keeping them in sync. It's not an easy task, but now it is. You simply check the boxes where else in the world you want your data replicated, and we'll take care of making sure all of it just magically happens for you. Again, let's talk about cost, because again, cost is something that worries a lot of people, and we have tons of different options when it comes to how you're going to run your SQL Server as well. If you're a hyperscale, if you're a e-commerce site who needs all the performance you can get, we have hyperscale and business critical instances. And again, we give you an estimate of how much that's going to cost you every month. We also have general purpose. This is really good for development environments or simply low usage, low volume type of websites. Now, you have two choices here, and I love the serverless choice, which I'll talk about in a second. The provisioned choice is, let's stand up a SQL server, and I want it running 24/7 with a certain amount of virtual CPUs, certain amount of disk space, ready to rock and roll all the time. And we can do that for you, and as you can see, it'll cost you about $380. Or you can say, you know what? My app's not used all the time. We're only open Monday through Friday between 9 to 5. I don't need the database running after hours or on the weekends. Using a serverless model might be the better fit for you because we'll only charge you for the storage and the compute while you're actually using it, which means on the weekends, it literally will just go to sleep. and cost you just the storage of the data and not any of the compute time as well. So again, this is just another option where we're trying to make sure that people can maximize their money when they go to the cloud, and it's not a runaway trek. You have complete control over how you want to provision and spend your money inside of Azure. Another thing that I'd like to show you is connecting to your database doesn't have to be an arduous task. You don't have to go into SSMS or use some third-party tools. You can actually do it right here in the cloud. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and log in here. Let me see if I can get my password right. And what I'm doing is I'm logging into that instance of SQL Server that's in the cloud. And I can see all my tables. I can come in here and look at my customer table if I wanted to. I could come in here and run a quick query. And if I go ahead and click on run here, you'll see that I have data in this table. This customers table, which I didn't talk about earlier, is because it's a new table that we've added for a new feature where our marketing team and our sales team really wanted to be able to track our customers so that they could engage with them, send ads to them, send coupons to them that might be important to them. But it wasn't something that I wanted to spend my developers' time on. This is something that I promised, yeah, I'll create the table for you, but the business team, the sales team, you guys are going to go write the apps for this. We do not have time to go write apps for this customer idea, but we'll give you the schema that you need inside of your database. Luckily for them, Power Platform is available to help people who are not developers write really cool apps without knowing anything about development or writing a single line of code. So what we're going to do is we're actually going to use some of these Power Platform features right now to build an application that sits on top of this database. And I'll show you just how quickly we can do it. One of the other things that we wanted to do was not only create an app that sits on top of this database, but also be able to react every time a new customer is added to the database. We wanted to be notified of it. So what we're going to do to get notified is create something called a flow app. A flow app allows us to be able to connect different assets or different products from Microsoft into a workflow that does really cool stuff for us. And the one that I want is every time a new person is added to that database table, I want a Teams message to be sent to a team inside of Microsoft Teams, a channel inside of Microsoft Teams. So what we're going to do here is we're going to try to wire these two up and make sure that everything works the way that I need it to. So here we go. We have Microsoft Teams. It already knows who I am and we're connected. And now I'm going to connect it to my SQL Server database. So I need to give my SQL Server database a name. So I'm just going to call this customer tracker. I'll put DLB just for the fun of it. And now I need, again, connection information. I need the server name and I need the database name. So if I come back over here to my database and go to overview, everything I need is here. I need this, which is my server name, which I'm going to go ahead and copy. And then I need this, which is my database name, which I'm also going to go ahead and copy. So if I go back over here, I can say, let's go ahead and put in the server name. And I'm going to use the multiple clipboards that's built into Windows. You might have wondered, like, why didn't I copy and paste them individually? Because I don't have to. I need the server name, which is this one. And then if I go ahead and push Windows V again, I can now go ahead and paste in my name here for my database. I need my username, and then I need my password. All right, perfect. So if I go ahead and click on create, Flow is creating a connection with my SQL Server. It's also creating a connection with Microsoft Teams. And when I click on OK, it's going to allow me to create a workflow such that every time a user is added to that table, it's going to then send a message over into a Microsoft Teams for me. So what I'm going to do is say I need to make sure that we're connected to the customers table. That's the one that I'm watching. Then I'm going to go inside of Microsoft Teams, and I'm going to find the particular team, which is going to be the Tailwind Traders team, which is here. And inside of the Tailwind Traders team, I have a channel, and that channel is going to be called customers. Okay. So now what we're going to do is we're going to build the body of the message that I want to send to my channel every single time a message is actually created. So we're going to click on name, and then I'm going to say is a new customer. So every time you add a person's name, I'm going to get a message in Teams that says this is a new customer, and I want to go ahead and name this thing. Let's go back. So let me name this something different. I don't want to just call it new. We'll call it new customer flow, and I'm going to save this. So what I've created is I've created a new flow application that is running right now, who is monitoring that SQL Server database table, and every time a new customer is added, is going to send a message over to Microsoft Teams. So what we need now is an application that will actually add records to that particular database for us, and we can do that using Power Apps. Power Apps allows us to write really cool applications without writing a single line of code. So what we need to do here is give our app a name. So I'm going to call this Customer Tracker. Again, I'll have my database connection string, and then I'm going to need my credentials for my database. And then finally, what table do I want to actually sit upon? And I'm going to sit on top of customers. Now, when I took you into the query analyzer and I ran the query, you saw that there were actual people already in the customer table. And what you're going to see is in the background, it's creating an app for us. And it's actually going to pull in some of that sample data, making sure that it lands in the right place. And if we need to, make any modifications to the application. But I'm not going to write a single line of code to actually make the app work. We're going to get a mobile application and a Windows 10 store application without writing anything. So right now it's building it in the background. You're starting to see the shape of the application take shape. You can now see we have a customers list table. And then in a moment, there's going to free us up and give us access to this. There's Abel and Patrick that were already in the database table. And I can still make this pretty. This is clearly the table. We don't want to show this to our end users. So I'm going to click on this and I'm going to change this to be customers. And then I'm going to come down here because not only does it have a list view, it also has a details view, and it did the same thing here. So I'm going to change that to customers as well. And then we also have an edit screen. And finally, I want this to be pretty as well. So I'm going to go back to the front screen. And I'm going to click on this play button, and I now have a fully functioning application. I'm going to click on plus. I'm going to add myself in here. So there's Donovan. I'm also going to add my wife in here as well. So we'll go ahead and add Chelsea in here as well. And now you can see I have 4 people. I can sort automatically, so I have sorting. If I wanted to come in here and filter just for my wife, you can see I can see just her information showing up. So a full CRUD application. I can create, retrieve, update, and delete. I can sort and I can filter, and I didn't write a single line of code to get there. Now it takes about 60 seconds for after I add a record before it shows up in Teams. And that's just the amount of time that I need to show you Power BI. What we're going to be able to do is create a Power BI report over some of the data inside of that database. And then when I'm finally done with that, I'll go back into Teams and show you exactly what happened with those new records. So what this is going to do is it's going to launch Power BI Desktop. It downloaded the schema of the data that I want to connect to so that I can start using Power BI Desktop to build my application. It loaded up on one of my other screens. So in a second here, I'm going to move this over. Let me finish this. Unfortunately, it's actually on a different screen. And on my other screen, it's showing me the desktop. I'll bring the desktop over here in just a second. I'm going to select my brands table, and I'm going to select my products table, load that, and then I'll be able to move this over to another screen. It's connecting everything up, and now I can move it over. So all I did when this fired up on my wrong desktop was told it I want to use 2 different tables. I want to use the products table and the brands table from inside of my database source. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and tell them there's a relationship. The ID of brands actually equals the brand ID. By doing that, it's now going to understand that there's a relationship there, and it's already showing me how it's going to bring that data across. With that relationship, I can go back over to my canvas and I can start selecting what I want. For example, I want to have the name, I want to have the price, and I want to have the brand name as well. So if I go over here and stretch this out, you can see I now have name, price, and name. Well, this doesn't really help me. I actually want this to be brand name. So I'm going to come back over here, and I'm simply going to rename this, and I'm going to rename it as brand instead. So I'm not changing the underlying database, but I am changing the shape of this data source. And as you can see now, I have a fully functioning report. We'll go ahead and make this a little bit bigger here. I'm going to hover over here and make it bigger. I can sort by brand, I can sort by price, or I can come over here and I can actually filter by brand. Let's say I only care about drills. And as you can see, I can filter this as well. So again, you don't have to know anything about development. You don't even have to really understand databases all that well. All you have to understand is the data that you want to be able to collect and share and be able to show that you can filter, sort, and all this information right here from inside of Power BI. So we're really allowing you to utilize the data that you're actually collecting. So let's run back over here real quick to Microsoft Teams. And inside of Microsoft Teams, if I go over here to the customer thing, you can see Chelsea is a new customer, Donovan is a new customer. I've created a Flow application, a mobile application, and a Power BI dashboard in about 65 seconds. And actually everything's automatically working, and I did not write a single line of code to do any of it. And you get all that from the power inside of Azure. Now, we've done a lot with your data. Data is one of the most valuable resources we have on Earth right now. It actually is more valuable than oil. And when you have something that valuable, it's really important that you secure it. So what we can do is come down here to advanced security. Advanced security has been running in the background and trying to identify things that I can do to make sure that my data is safe. And if it's not, it'll tell me that it's not. I can drill in on the vulnerability assessment. and it will list out exactly what's wrong and even help me fix it. What I mean by that is once I identify one of these items and this high risk item I want to take action on, I simply click on it and I get to learn a lot more about it. It tells me exactly what's wrong, what I need to do to fix it, and even gives me steps to remediate it. So I can click on this. It takes me right to the correct blade inside of Azure to fix this particular problem. So there's not me having to digest what this is and then having to figure out where in the portal do I go to fix this. We're taking you right to that point. Just turn on auditing, save this, and that vulnerability will automatically be saved for you just that quickly. Now, this is fantastic for being able to go back in and look at the security of my data. But what about the security of my entire resources? Because I have more than just data in Azure. I have functions running in Azure. I have Kubernetes clusters in Azure. I have virtual machines in Azure. I need a way to make sure that I can secure everything. And we do that from Security Center. Security Center is like a guardian angel sitting upon your Azure subscription, protecting you for every asset that you have. So now you can see the data stuff is in here as well, but also compute information. I can come in here and say, hey, I have some vulnerabilities here. I want to go back in and fix one of these. It also has a quick fix here. So all I have to do is check this, click on remediate, and that problem is automatically solved. And this is protecting me across my entire subscription, not just the data that I'm collecting, but the infrastructure upon which I'm running all that information as well is all being protected for me, which is fantastic. It also allows you to look at different levels of certification. So if you are SOX compliant or you have other type of regulations you have to adhere to, you can actually come in here and we'll actually show you how to become compliant for that particular certification or that particular regulation that you have in your country or in your business or in your industry. We'll come in and show you exactly how you stack up against that particular certification and help you guide through that. So security is something that we think about constantly. The data, the resources, your Azure pipeline, everywhere that we go. Now we've moved a part of our application into the cloud. And what I want to do before I move on is see if there's been any questions whatsoever. If there have been any questions, I'll stop now and answer them. If not, we're going to jump over and talk about the developer experience. So have there been any questions so far?
Yeah, Donovan, we have quite a few questions for you here.
Cool.
So the first one, is there an option for MySQL within Cosmos DB? Like AWS Aurora?
Inside of Cosmos DB, the only ones that you saw there were the ones that are supported. So if you're using pure ANSI SQL, then it's going to come across underneath the SQL option, right? If you're using something very specific to MySQL, we actually have MySQL inside of Azure, right? So you don't even have to switch from MySQL to Cosmos DB. You can literally move from MySQL to MySQL in Azure. Right?
Got it. And
go ahead.
And then when you were going through the redundancy side, one of the questions is like, why wouldn't you want to add all the regions for redundancy?
Well, there's going to be a cost implication there. And if you don't have people inside that region, putting the data close to them doesn't buy you anything, right? So if you're a global company with people in all 50 of the regions that we have, then it might make sense for you. But strategically, what you're trying to do, let's say, for example, you're an American company and you really want to make sure that America has great coverage, you might choose one or two of them. I would still pick one that's far away simply for disaster recovery, right? I don't want there's something catastrophic to happen in the United States and I not have an off-site backup. But I don't need a backup in every region of the world to make sure that I have at least one backup that I can use to restore in the case of a disaster. So you don't get those replications for free. There's a cost implication to checking those boxes because there's more storage, there's no ingress and egress of your network. So we'll charge you when you jump different regions and things. So it's not just check them all because you get it for free. There's a cost and there should be a decision and a thought process behind every one of those checkboxes.
Yeah, completely makes sense. So pay for it if you need it. Otherwise, just do whatever.
Yeah, otherwise it's a waste of money. Yeah, if you don't have people in Australia using your application, unless that's just a disaster recovery, why are you putting data close to Australia? There's no one there utilizing that data. So you're absolutely right.
Yeah, great. And then one more. When you talked about SQL Server Microsoft Flow, you mentioned the premium flow. What does premium get you? What does it mean?
I don't remember saying premium flow. If I said premium flow, that was I misspoke. I didn't mean to say that. There's flow basically is the feature that allow you to move data from one to the other. I don't even know if there's a premium option for flow. So I missed it. I said that.
Yeah, no worries. Okay, thank you. Also, the question we have so far, we might have later as well. And for those of you who are listening, keep sending us your questions and we'll feed them over to Donovan as it keeps going.
Yep. And I'll take another break after I do some of the developer stuff as well. And for the moderators, I can hear you, so you might mute yours as well, because sometimes you bump and it distracts me. So everybody mute except me. and then we'll keep going. All right, cool. All right, so let's talk about, we moved some of our stuff into Azure, right? So we moved our database into Azure. We know we're doing the right thing when it comes to cost, and we're also doing the right thing when it comes to security. But I still want my developers to be highly productive, even though some of our assets are in the cloud. What we don't want to do is like, we're moving to the cloud and we're going to make your life miserable now because everything just got harder because assets are sitting in the cloud. Actually, the opposite is true. What I'm going to do is I'm going to move over into Visual Studio Code. Visual Studio Code is an amazing editor. If you haven't used it, I highly encourage you to use it. Even if I didn't work at Microsoft, I would still use this product because you can't see me right now, but I have a Mac machine and a Linux machine behind me, and I use this exact same editor on all those platforms, so I don't have to learn Vim or some Emacs or some other different editor everywhere I go. I bring code with me, and everything I know and love about code works on Mac, Windows, and Linux, which is fantastic. Another thing that's really incredible about code is its extension library. So here I am in the marketplace. I've already filtered it for Azure. There's over 90 different Azure-specific extensions inside the marketplace. This is going to allow working with Azure to be very, very easy for you. That means if you're working on storage or you're working for functions, which we'll play with here in just a second, you will have an amazing experience inside of there. And not only are the extensions for things like Azure, there's extensions for everything. Containers are all the rage. Everyone's talking about containers and specifically Kubernetes and how do we get there. And I remember when I first started working with containers, I was very intimidated. And also I would fire up a container, it wouldn't work quite right. And I had no idea, how do I get inside that container and look around and see what mistake I made so I can fix it? And then I had to figure out, how do you get to the logs and how do you get to the details? What really cool thing is that you come over here and you say inspect, and all the information I need to inspect the contents of that particular image and container running are now here for me. So I can go ahead and debug this really quickly. If I wanted to inspect some of the information or get the details on like what image is it actually running, did I pull down the right image inside of that container, I can do that as well. What volumes are mounted, this is fantastic. But the really important part for me was being able to actually connect into that particular running image and be able to say, hey, let me run some commands and see what's going on in there. To do that, you simply click this button. You don't have to know anything about Docker. You don't have to know anything about how do you SSH into there. How do I get my bash shell running? My bash shell is now running inside of my MongoDB container running locally. So what I can do here is I can do things like just type Mongo, and now I'm actually running Mongo inside of the container that's on my local machine here. If I were to do something like show me my databases, I can see there's a Tailwind Traders in there. I can say use that Tailwind Traders. Let's go ahead and run a command here. Now you'll notice this says there's only 2 records. That's because we only had 2 records on-prem. We have 4 records in the cloud, which lets you know that I am still connected to my local instance of MongoDB, not the one that's running inside Cosmos DB. But being able to just jump inside of a container and be able to run commands locally is fantastic. It's changed my confidence level when it comes to figuring out how am I going to containerize some of these particular applications that my company is asking me to do that for. In addition to containers, let me close this out. There's some other cool extensions here. For example, if you are doing Kubernetes, we obviously have a Kubernetes extension that allows you to go ahead and look at your Helm deployments and jump inside of all the different nodes inside of your Kubernetes cluster if you need to. SQL Server databases. So this is the actual database that's running up inside of Azure. I can come over here, right click on this and say, show me the top 1,000, and I will be able to see those records right here inside of code. So we should see 4 records over here. So here's Abel and Patrick that were there already, and Donovan and Chelsea that I added while from the actual Power app that we actually created a moment ago, which is really cool. And then finally, Azure. The coup de grace. This is everything that I want. This is API management, which we haven't gotten to, but we will get to. App services is one of my favorite services inside of Azure. And then Azure Functions, which we're going to talk about here in just a second. Storage accounts that I might have. And even, again, that Cosmos DB. So if I wanted to come here, let me close some of these windows out. Let's close this one. And I'm going to close this one as well. And what's really cool about this is you can create things called scrapbooks inside of your Cosmos DB. So I'm going to go ahead and refresh this thing here. And we're going to come in. If I create, you can see our Tailwind Traders is here. We can see our card is here. And we can see all 4 records. See, these are the 4 records in the cloud. I can come up here and create something called a scrapbook. And a scrapbook allows you to connect to a database that's sitting inside of Azure, but then run commands here locally. And if you don't know the Mongo syntax, it's okay, because what you can do is just start typing, and you're going to get IntelliSense. So it says, hey, there's something in there called cart, and there's a command called count, and I would like to go ahead and execute that. And then inside of here, we're going to see that there's actually 4. So again, the 2 that we had on-prem, but the 4 we have in the cloud, being able to connect to a Cosmos DB here and run all kinds of queries and actually get IntelliSense as part of it, all comes from Visual Studio Code, which is freaking awesome. Because I do not know the Mongo syntax, so it was really cool when I was able to do that. Other thing I want to talk to you about is how you can create functions. Functions are a way, it's called serverless, and it's a way for you to take a very small unit of work and be able to scale it down to 0, and then be able to just scale it up when you need to without having to deploy all the infrastructure for a full application. It's a great way to build APIs. And I remember when I started working with Azure Functions, I was a little intimidated then too. I get intimidated a lot when I'm learning something new. And it's like, how am I supposed to develop a function serverless when I'm not connected to the cloud or I'm on a long flight across the world? And what was really cool is that we have an emulator that allows you to do all of that stuff. And all I have to do here is say, I would like to create a new project. I'm going to browse to the location where I want to create that project, and I'm going to go here to Tailwind Traders. I'm going to choose this API folder. So click OK. It then says, okay, Donovan, what language would you like to program in? Going back to the fact that you can use C#, which is what I like, JavaScript, TypeScript, Python, Java, and we just introduced PowerShell. So all those automation scripts, those time scripts that you have that run every hour, every 5 minutes, or however long to go back and do maintenance using PowerShell, you can now automate that with functions instead of having a long-running process or a Windows service or a scheduled job inside of Windows Scheduler. All that can go away now. You can actually write that as a function, and we'll run it for you automatically. So I'm going to go ahead and say I want to do C#. You can also have different types of triggers. When do you want this function to run? Do you want it to run on a timer? So combining timer with PowerShell gives you a lot of great automation options. Service bus, every time something enters a queue, every time something enters an event grid, a Cosmos DB triggers, blob triggers, every time a file drops into a blob storage, we can actually kick off a function to go do something with the data, which will come back in a moment as well. But I'm just going to do a simple HTTP trigger. An HTTP trigger is one where it's just like any API that you've ever used before. So we're going to go ahead and accept all the default names, and we're going to go ahead and look at the access. We can have different levels of access control for security purposes, but I'm going to wrap this function inside of something called API management, which gives me a lot more control over who has access, how they get access, how they learn how to use my API. So I'm not even going to worry about security when I'm designing the API, because I know I'm going to put it behind API management. So anonymous is going to be fine for me, and we can go ahead and open this in a new window, which is fine. So yep. We'll write these settings, and what it's going to do now, as you can see down in the bottom, is creating a whole new project for me. It's firing that project up over here, and now what I have is this brand new project running that I can go off and start doing some development on. So what I'm going to do here is show you just how quickly we can start to debug some of this stuff here. So I'll go ahead and click on F5. Click on F5 inside of Visual Studio Code, and it's going to start firing up my code for me. And we're going to get some emulator running down here at the bottom. And what the emulator is going to do is it's going to go off and find all the different functions inside that particular folder and start helping me run across those particular ones. And now what it's going to do here, what it normally doesn't do, is it's going to give me 2 URLs. The reason why is because I didn't clean up well enough. And this is the one that I actually want to look at, which is the one I just created with you. So if I come back here, go over to this particular file, and I set up a breakpoint here, I can then copy that, go back over to my web browser, which is here, open up a new tab, and I'm just going to do $name equals Donovan. Press enter, and then if I go back over here to Microsoft Teams, you can see I've hit my breakpoint, and I hover over this, and it's going to say Donovan. So creating a Azure function is that easy. Go into Microsoft Teams, say create a new project, answer a few questions, and have a fully functioning Azure function that you can dev, connected to the internet or not, which is fantastic. So I'll go ahead and click on F5. What I wanted to show you there is just how quickly and easily you can actually start creating new functions inside of your application. If I go back to my other instance of Visual Studio Code, I want to show you how easy you can deploy it as well. So all you have to do is simply click on this button here and say, I would like to deploy my app, and you can browse to where you actually want to deploy. Like I want to deploy the files from here. This is the existing one. And if I wanted to, I could go ahead and initialize this particular project, but I'm not going to do that because I've already deployed this. but I wanted to show you just the clicks that you would go through to deploy your function into the cloud. And when you do, it lands inside of your Azure function, and a lot of cool stuff starts to happen there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to jump back into the portal now that I've showed you that your development environment, your development experience, your inner loop is still really, really fast. It's really, really productive, even though you're now moving stuff to the cloud. And let's talk about why would I even want to use a function to begin with as I start to modernize my application. So I'm going to go ahead and close this, jump back over here to my Azure portal, and I'm going to jump back inside of my resource group. Inside of this resource group, you're going to see that I have something called an Azure function, which is this guy here. And I want to talk to you about some of the cool features that we have inside of our serverless platform. And under platform features, the first one I want to talk to you about is scaling out. One of the beautiful things about functions is not only do we give you, I think, 1 million executions a month for free, but we scale up or scale out as fast as we need to for the input of the data. The problem can be that when we scale down to 0, which means no one's hit your API in a long time, so there's no instances running, when you get that first instance, our framework kicks into action and says, oh, I need to provision the function necessary. And then sometimes it can be like a while before that response comes back because we have to provision the function, we have to JIT your code, and start it running again. And that first hit can take a little while. So what you can do now is you can actually start having what we call pre-warmed instances. So a pre-warmed instance here allows you to say, no, I always want there to be at least one instance that's hot and ready to rock and roll so that none of my customers actually have a cold start experience. And as traffic starts to come in, we'll start scaling out and warming up instances such that when they're needed, we're automatically going to be able to satisfy those requests without there being a cold start for anyone, which is a really big ask for those of people that were starting to use Azure Functions for us as well. The other thing that I wanted to show you as a premium feature is the ability to assign an identity to a resource in Azure. Historically, when you wanted, for example, this Azure function to access Key Vault or this Azure function to access a database, you would create a service principal, or you would create username and passwords that they're just not as secure as being able to say, I want this identity, this function to have access to that other resource. We would have to pass around username and passwords or service principals and service principal keys. That's sensitive information that I wish I just didn't have to pass around. So instead what we do is he's like, we're going to allow you to assign an identity to this function and then go to another resource in Azure and grant that identity permission over a particular type of resource. Let me show you what I mean. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come back, because I've already assigned an identity here, and we're going to go back, and remember we created a Key Vault together when we very first started. So I'm going to go over here to the Key Vault, and what I want to do is create a new secret. And in that secret, I'm going to store some sensitive information, and then I'm going to grant that function permission to this particular item here. So let's go ahead and generate and import a new item here. We're going to call it MongoDB, and we're going to enter in the secret. I think I might still have my MongoDB connection string. So there's the MongoDB connection string that I want to actually store securely. I'm going to go ahead and click on create. So now when I created this, I now have a secret sitting inside of this particular item here, and I need to make sure that, yeah, this is exactly what I need. So we have all the information that we need to be able to go ahead and show this particular item. Now, the way that I access this item is I need to have this funny little secret identifier. This isn't sensitive, there's no keys in there, but I need this to be able to say, this is the secret that I want you to go get from Key Vault. But who has permission to get that secret? That's what I'm about to set up. So when I come back over here to my Key Vault, I'm going to set up something called an access policy, and I'm going to create a new access policy here. And I only want this identity, which is the function, to be able to get secrets. I don't want them to list secrets. I don't want them to update. Don't want them to create, delete, none of that. I just want you to be able to get the specific secret that I told you that you're allowed to go get. And then here's where the cool part starts. I can come over here, and what I should be able to do, dbmi, is I can now find that actual function. So I'm saying only this function, no usernames, no passwords, no service principals, no service principal keys. This particular function has access to this Key Vault to get particular values from it. So I'm going to go ahead and add this particular identity here, and now this person has permission to go get a particular item. So now how do I wire them all up? I now have given the function permission to my Key Vault, but then how do I give my Key Vault the information over to my function. So let's jump back over to our function real quick. So resource group, function. I'm going to come over here into configuration, and I'm going to add a new configuration setting. Because you might remember when I showed you updating my particular MongoDB, it was just an app setting. So I'm going to create a new application setting here. I'm going to call it MongoDB, and the value gets funny. So it's @m. So I'm basically saying, hey, there's a Microsoft Key Vault secret, and the secret key is that weird little thing that I copied. And just this way, I can now say, whenever I ask for the MongoDB, go to Key Vault and get that value from Key Vault securely and bring it over here so that I can use it inside of my code. But I do not have usernames, do not have passwords. All of this is now very, very secure. I was able to use identities to do that. So I don't need to save this. I just wanted to show you how you wire it all up. The last thing I wanted to show you about our functions is one more premium feature, and that is API management. You remember I said, I don't care about the authentication because I'm going to lock this behind API management. So I'm going to click on this and explain to you what this is actually doing. API management allows us to be able to create different connections and expose our APIs the ways that we need to. Let's see why that freaked out there for me. Let's go another route. I'm going to go here, go to my, where's my API management? There you are, API management service. And I'm going to go ahead and add an API here, and I'm going to add an Azure function. All right, great. So what we're going to do is we're going to browse to the function that we need. So we can see the function that I've already created. This is great because I don't have to memorize any of this stuff because it's all built right into the portal. All these names are fine for me. I really don't think I care about all that. So we're going to go ahead and click on create. And now this is creating a portal for this API that I could then share with anyone that I would want to use this particular API. They're going to get automatically generated help. They're going to get the proper permissions. They're going to be able to debug using this particular API without me having to write any additional Chrome or additional website to teach people how to use it. They can, for example, choose a particular API. They'll be able to click on test at the top. Then here I'll add a parameter called name, and I'll put Donovan again. And then down here I can click on send, and down here I can actually interrogate exactly what happened. I can see the headers, I can see a trace message, I can see it said hello Donovan. And this allows you as the maintainer of an API to be able to easily share this with individuals that need to use that particular API. Now this works great on the web, and people really love API management. But what they started asking us for is like, Donovan, we want to be able to run API management behind our firewall. We have a lot of APIs that we're never going to expose to the internet. We're going to expose to different parts of our organization, but we still need this much control and this much power, and we want this ease of use. How can we do this behind our firewall? So what we recently announced was the ability for you to take API management as a Docker image and run it inside any container you want anywhere, including behind your firewall, and expose this same functionality to any API that you want, regardless if it's connected to the internet or not. So it's really nice to be able to use API management on-prem, which is really good. One of the things I didn't mention about functions that I wanted to talk about really quick is that functions are also an item that you don't have to use in Azure. You can actually write an Azure function, add a Docker file to it, and package it up as an image, and then run that function in any Kubernetes cluster in the world. I recently did this demo against a GKE. So I was actually using a Google cluster to run Azure functions in, but I tore it down and I didn't have time to set it back up. But one of these days I'll do that demo for you as well. But it can work on any cluster, even a cluster that's not connected to the internet. So think about taking the power of Azure functions and running it behind your firewall and being able to scale down to 0 in your cluster. So like literally no instances are running. And we have this thing called Kata, which is a daemon running inside of your AKS cluster that's monitoring whatever the trigger is. So for example, if you had a queue as your trigger, you can still scale down to 0 nodes inside of your Kubernetes cluster while it is then monitoring the queue. If there's any items show up in the queue, it will then start spinning up nodes and pods for you to run your function. And then when the queue is empty, tear all of them down and scale back down to 0, which is really, really nice. So that's kind of a funny little segue into Kubernetes. And I can't talk about GKE, even mention it, without talking about AKS. So AKS is our Kubernetes offering, right? And it's really nice because we take care of the entire control plane for you. You only have to worry about the workloads that you want to run on that particular control plane. But one of the things that I get asked a lot is, Donovan, upgrading the nodes is a pain when it comes to Kubernetes. It's a pain to update the masters and the nodes. Does AKS fix that for us? And we do. So what you can do is you can come here, for example, and you can click on upgrade. And if I do this, I'm now going to be presented the ability for me to choose what version of the engine do I want to be running on my master nodes. Select the node that I want or the version that I want, simply click on save, and it will take care of the rest of making sure all my master nodes are upgraded correctly. Now we can also do the same thing for your node pools. Your node pools are basically the worker nodes that we're going to use to run all of your pods. And as you can see, I can see what the current version is, and I can actually have a Kubernetes cluster with both Windows and Linux built inside, which is kind of cool. And if I needed to, I could just come over here and say that I want to go ahead and upgrade this as well. The only caveat here is that you cannot upgrade your node pools beyond that of your masters. This is why this is grayed out. Is that, hey, you have to upgrade your actual cluster node, your control plane first, and then you can come in here and upgrade this as well. Now, one of the things I wanted to point out here real quick is the fact that you do not have to come into the portal to do this type of maintenance. When you have lots of nodes, you don't want to have to come in here and right click on each one of these and say upgrade to get that done. You want to figure out a way that you can automate that. And you can use the Azure CLI, or you can actually use Cloud Shell as well. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to fire up Cloud Shell here real quick. And Cloud Shell is a shell built into the browser that has both PowerShell and Bash, different versions of it. And then you are automatically logged into your Azure subscription, and you can start running commands. For example, I'm going to make sure that I'm using the right subscription because I'm logged in as Donovan, but I have a lot of subscriptions I can use. I want to make sure that I go ahead and show you, these are my node pool, and I want to go ahead and list these in a table view. So you're going to basically see the exact same data here that you're seeing above in the UI, but I'm seeing it from a graphical standpoint here. And another thing that I might want to be able to do is be able to, for example, show you the help of the upgrade. So using automation, I can come in here using this information and automate the upgrading of all of my node pools to the next version without me having to manually come in here and do all these things. So there's not much you can't do from the command line these days, either using Azure PowerShell or using the Azure CLI to automate a lot of the automation or a lot of the maintenance and upgrades that you need to do to your resources inside of Azure. The last thing that I want to talk about before we leave AKS is dev spaces. Dev spaces are a fantastic technology that allow you to actually debug production problems in your own pods inside of your production cluster. We've all been there as developers where that bug that you're being told about only shows up in production. You cannot seem to replicate it at all locally, no matter how hard you try. If only I could get into production, I could debug this. And now with dev spaces, that's exactly what you can do. You can actually stand up inside that production cluster an exact replica of what you need to be able to go off and duplicate that without disrupting or disturbing production at all. So it really get like that inner loop, that developer productivity we talked about a moment ago. This is just taking that to the nth degree, making sure that just because you're in the cloud, just because you're using Kubernetes, doesn't mean you're going to become less efficient. We're going to make sure that you're just as efficient as you were before. Many of you might have known me before I started talking because you follow me when it comes to DevOps, which is what I used to do all the time. And what I want to show you here is something called a DevOps project. We take the power of DevOps and we're embedding it directly inside of the Azure portal so that you can build really nice pipelines with, again, just clicking through the portal. You don't have to jump all over the place or leave the portal to get DevOps integrated inside of your workflow. You can pick whatever language you want. Let's go ahead and pick Node.js. I'm a big fan of Node. I can choose what framework I actually want to use. I'll go ahead and stick with Express, which is the one I use all the time. And now we can start talking about the ways that we can deploy this. We can use App Service. App Service is a fantastic offering that runs on Windows or on Linux. You can take your WAR file from Tomcat and just give it to App Service and it will run. You can take your zip files, you can take your web deploys and just give them to App Service and those applications will just run as they are. You don't have to learn anything about Kubernetes. You don't have to learn anything about containerizing or Dockerizing. Just give us your files and we will rehost them for you inside of App Service. It's like having your virtual directory, but that's all you have to worry about. We worry about the servers, we patch the servers, we do all that for you. All you have to worry about is the app in which you want to deploy. Another thing that I love about App Service is there's a concept called deployment slots. Deployment slots are where I actually have two versions of my app running at all times. One that my customers can access and see, and one that I can access and see. And the one that I can see is where I deploy my code, and it can take as long as I need to because I'm not going to take my site down to copy the files. Historically, we would put up a warning, January 4th at 4 o'clock, we're taking our system down for maintenance, and we would take the system down and our customers couldn't use it while we're copying files frantically to the server, and then we release the files to the users hoping that they work, and if they don't, we have to take it back down again. Deployment slots fix all of that because we would deploy to the slot while production is still running and our customers don't even know. We can then access the deployment slot. We can actually test the site and make sure everything landed correctly, everything works as we expect it to, and then when we're ready, we just swap the slots. And instantly, our customers get the new value with zero downtime. And should something unforeseen happen and something bad happen, you flip that same bit and everything goes back the way that it was and you roll back in an instant. So app service, I'm a huge fan. I actually use it myself for some of my own websites. Kubernetes, obviously a fantastic service, but you have to learn Docker. You have to learn Kubernetes. You got to learn words like Helm and Draft and Brigade to get there sometimes. And that can be intimidating, but I want you to know that you have options. You don't have to go full-blown Kubernetes to get into the cloud effectively. And if you want to kind of dip your toe into the container world, but you're not ready for a full-blown orchestrator like Kubernetes, you can actually run containers inside of app service. So you can Dockerize your app, give app service the image, and then you still get the power of deployment slots, but you've already containerized your app, taking that baby step into that Kubernetes nirvana that you're looking for in the future. So I always stop here and talk about the different offerings that we have for you when you're trying to host an application inside of Azure. When you're done with this, what you're going to end up with is a pipeline. Now, this pipeline is a grow up from the pipeline I showed you earlier. Earlier, we were just deploying straight to production on-prem. Here, we're able to use the power of the cloud to stand up dev environments, QA environments, staging environments, production environments, run Selenium tests, load tests, performance and pen tests between each one of those environments before we move to the next environment, because we have the infinite scale of the cloud to be able to provision those environments. And because we're doing things smart and we're actually creating resource groups for each environment, we can destroy the dev environment and the QA environment when we no longer need them, saving us money and being able to re-provision them the instant that we need them through automation like infrastructure as code and DevOps best practices, which is great. And as I mentioned before, not only can I deploy to the cloud, but if you need to employ something like Azure Stack for a hybrid scenario, you'd be able to deploy there just as easily. Now, one of the other things I want to talk to you about is that moving to the cloud should just open your mind, right, of all the possibilities and the amazing things that you can do to the cloud, because you now have access to cognitive services, AI and ML, all this kind of cool stuff. And our team got excited about that as well, and then went inside and started adding some really cool AI to our application. For example, let's imagine you're at your buddy's house, you two are in the garage, you're working on a project, and you see a power drill that they have, and you're like, man, I would really like that power drill. So what you do is you simply take a picture of the power drill, and now using cognitive services, we're able to match that using artificial intelligence and say, oh, I know what that is. That's a drill. Let me show you all the other drills that we have available for you in our store. That's just a sample of how you can actually start utilizing some of the things that we call cognitive services. Cognitive services have things like vision, image, language, web searching, decision matrix. All that stuff is actually packaged for you. And what we've been doing is making sure that you can use this information not only in Azure, but also on the edge. You can take a lot of our packaged machine learning models, run them as images on the edge, completely disconnected from the internet in your own Kubernetes cluster, bringing the power of AI all the way to the edge with you as well. And one of the things that I really like a lot is the decision where you can actually create bots and things like that. And when you think about what we actually offer you inside of Azure when it comes to AI and ML, it's a lot. And I remember I did Chago and I did a show on how do you rub DevOps on bots, so that we do DevOps best practices with bots. So it's something that I've always liked. And I thought, man, it'd be cool if we could add like a concierge bot to our actual application. And we can do that using the bot framework and some of the other cognitive services from Azure. So let me show you what we did. So what we do here is we have a bot that we're actually writing. And over here in the right-hand corner, what we've done is we've given it Lewis a few of the ideas of what we think people might say. And Lewis is, language understanding service. So it basically says, if you give me enough examples, I'll be able to fill in the blank so that we can have a natural conversation with our customers without you having to detail every single possible permeation of that particular conversation. And then what we can also do is come over here and actually create different decision trees. Like, how do I want the greeting to start? I want it to start with saying hi there. Then I can actually say, let's have a much more complicated conversation. Let's actually call out to some Azure functions based on data that we're collecting from our user and make decisions on where we should take this conversation. So it's really neat to be able to see how we can come in here and graphically design what we want our robot to do. And thanks to our emulators that I talked about earlier, we actually have one here where I can show you how the bot actually might work. So here's the bot's actually running, and as you can see here, it says, hi there, what kinds of things are you interested in? And I can do something like, do you have any gardening tools? It has tools, but not specifically gardening tools. In gardening, we had gnomes and things like that. It's like, no, unfortunately, we don't have any of those items. So then I can ask it another question, like, how about hardware? Which we know it had hammers and drills and wrenches, and that's exactly what it showed me. So here I am having what feels like a natural conversation with a human being, when in actuality I'm having it with a bot. And I didn't have to write every possible combination or sentence that the person might say to me. Lewis is able to start to interpret and anticipate what those are. And then if I click on something like this, just this easily. Using our cognitive services can sometimes be as little as 3 lines of code, adding it to your application to make sure that you can start to add what people are expecting and wowing your customers with artificial intelligence and vision recognition and Lewis and things like that, which is just fantastic. So I want to make sure that when you move to the cloud, you don't just lift and shift your application to the cloud, but you start to take advantage of the fact that you're in the cloud. And the last thing I want to talk about one more time is cost, because people get excited and they go out there and they start spending lots of money, and then people get upset. So let me show you one last thing when it comes to cost before I wrap up here, and that's cost management. Cost management allows you to do things like cost analysis. This is going to allow me to be able to come in and see exactly what I'm spending where. And I can drill into different areas, different resources. I can filter this. I can set budgets for myself. And when I set a budget, get alerts letting me know how far or how close I am to that particular budget. Let me see here. I'm going to go off script here for a second and see if I can find a little bit more attractive subscription that I can use here. So I'm going to go ahead and choose this subscription instead. And let's go ahead and select that subscription and see if we have a little bit more data in here. Perfect. So here we go with a much more data. You can see I'm using a lot more resources here. I can see exactly which ones are costing me what. I set a budget for 650. I'm forecast based on my current spend to get to about 630. So I'm probably in pretty good shape. But should I get too close to that, I can get alerts. I can come over here and drill into the item that's costing me the most money, which will then filter the chart above, letting me zero in on the items that I might want to go off in and do more research on or try to find ways to curb my spending. I can export these, which is really nice. So I can export them as images if they happen to be graphs. I can also export them as Excel spreadsheets, which I can actually use and share with my peers. And what's really cool about Excel is that when you create the reports, you can schedule them. When you schedule the reports, you can have them land inside of storage. And remember, I showed you earlier that if you have an Azure function, one of the ways that you can trigger that Azure function is by a trigger of blob storage. So we could actually have this report scheduled to drop into blob storage. It arriving in blob storage kicks off an Azure function that interrogates the data inside of that Excel spreadsheet and then take automated action against my subscription, saving my company tons and tons of money. So we've talked about security, we've talked about cost, we've talked about all the different amazing things inside of Azure. And just to get your mind thinking of, if I'm responsible for moving my code from on-prem to the cloud, all the different ways that Azure can actually help you out here. So I'm done talking. I am ready to answer all the questions that you could possibly have and give you some more information if I can help it. Thanks for having me.
Wow. So first of all, Donovan, that was amazing. That was a great lap around Azure and also a great description of how we can modernize your applications by moving to Azure. There's one question that's like burning on everyone's mind is, what is your favorite VS Code extension? If you had to pick one, which was the one that you love the most?
That's a good. The Azure one is fantastic. When you get it, you get all that other stuff. But I got to tell you, when I was able to jump into that freaking Mongo container running, I freaked out. I was like, that is freaking awesome, because every time I needed to attach, I'd have to go and search, how do I attach exec something or other? And it was just like such a nightmare to get attached to my image. When I clicked that button, and I was attached, I was like, oh my God, this is the coolest thing.
Yeah, that's pretty awesome. That's pretty awesome. Such an accessible. So Gert, thank you so much. Donovan, thank you so much for doing this. Everyone enjoyed this. You went really deep and learned different subjects. I appreciate taking time to do this. Gert, tell us what's coming up next. We have already a new session planned for next week. Tell us what we have to look forward to next.
Next week we have a session planned for Europe region, so it will be around 7 o'clock Central European time. So I don't know what's that time for you in the US, Eastern Standard Time. I'm not sure.
Yeah, 1 p.m. Eastern. Yeah, 1 p.m. Eastern.
So we will have
5 a.m. Australia. 5 a.m.
Yeah,
Australia.
we have Jacob N. He's an Azure MVP. He will talk about KEDA on Kubernetes. So a lot of event-driven architectures in there and those kind of things. He will talk about Brigade, some other open source projects related to that as well. So it will be a very cool session as well next week, and we'll be planning more sessions in the future as well. So follow us on YouTube and Twitter, and we'll keep you posted.
Yeah, definitely. Tell your friends. Remind you're able to keep watching this. Tell your friends, your colleagues about these sessions that we have. YouTube channel. Keep watching these videos, and we'll comment. Thank everyone for joining us. And again, Donovan, thank you so much for being a speaker on the first day of Azure Community Live.
It's my pleasure, guys.
Thanks, Donovan. And also, one last note, we're always looking for new speakers as well. It doesn't matter if you're a guru speaker like Donovan or if you're a first timer, we want to be open for everyone. So if you have a cool topic that you just learned on your own project, you want to share it with the rest of the world, contact us, fill in the CFP form, and we'll try to get you on the show.
All right, thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks, guys. See y'all later. Bye-bye.